let's see, where is all my stuff? I just need to make sure I've got, okay, I don't know why this is even up. Okay, that was not the one I thought it was. Let's see. Just need to make sure that I've mentioned my stream on Twitter. And let's see, I'll have to catch you up on where that is. Finishing touches on the font situation. No, it's not a font situation so much as it's like a font, conundrum. Let me check that spelling. Alright. Okay, so, Fiery Drake saying he's got a bot for letting him know when handmade streamers start their streams. Because apparently him and I didn't even know Fiery Drake had a stream. Like, I didn't know he was streaming, and I was told that he was streaming near the beginning of one of my streams, I think yesterday. So I also need that bot so that I know, because I often miss the beginning of Miblo because I don't have email notifications from him. So the handmade dev guys are supposed to be handling this problem for us. So hopefully I hope the prototype for that thing is coming along, like, sooner rather than later, you know? Because that handmade, stream, well, I don't know, watch system would be great. So that I don't miss any of that. Alright, so, the last thing I was doing, and today's been a great day because I don't have any exams for the next few days. I don't have any homework. I don't have anything to do except work on 4coder. So, if you saw my last stream, if you watched the last video, I've done way more since then. I've had the whole day. So, the font stuff basically, like, the program's back to running, and I can pop it open and show you everything, and that's running through font IDs instead of font pointers now. It can do all sorts of great things. There's just one thing it can't do yet, and it's the last thing we need to do, is when one font, like when it first initializes, it has a certain number of slots for fonts, and I've artificially lowered that to 3. I'm gonna actually set this up higher and this up higher, but I've artificially lowered these to make sure it works, the replacement system. And basically what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna say when it first loads, the first 3 fonts here, that's what that 3 means, that it loads in, those actually get fully loaded, whereas these ones we just get the information for the font about its size and its names, right? We just sort of store that away and we keep it, and that's all we have for it, but we can still reference that basic info, and if we ever try to render with it, it has to know that it's being used and then load that in so that it gets in there. And right now that just means, like, it's not multi-threaded loading in, it's just you say, hey, I need this, it's not there, it loads that in and then uses it, which could be a problem. There's basically 2 options there. I just either do it threaded or not, and if it's threaded, then that means that there are, like, certain frames where you don't see the font there, the text is gone, and, like, I've gone through and made sure it works. When the font is unloaded, it works. So let me get to that state. So there, I've just taken the font for my main theme, and I put it at the end of the list so it won't be the loaded one. And then I updated the style to use the font from in that location. And now you'll see when I open this, it's like the text isn't there. Why isn't the text there? Because the font's not loaded. It does all of the stuff it would normally do. It calculates heights and advances and everything based on the global font advance, or actually based on zeros. I have it all set up like if you can't get the advanced data, just plug in zeros because you can't see the text anyway. So it shouldn't matter. And so you can see that it's doing everything that it would do except for putting characters on the screen. And I can type in like the directory that I know by heart that I always load to test things. And here's a file, right? This is a file. It's the file I just opened a couple of, like maybe a minute ago. But now you can't see the text because it's not loaded in. And that's so close to being done. It's laughable how little time we might end up spending on font loading. But I did say at the on my Twitter just now that we're going to work on that, so hopefully it breaks right away, and then I can spend lots of good time still on this problem. If not, I'll have to come up with something new to do. So basically, helper. I'm trying to decide where the best place to do this work is. I don't think I want that to be a thing that it thinks about a lot in there. So alright. Drawglyph mono. Alright, so those are the two places where we push a piece that has a font ID associated with it. I don't think there are any others. I can take a quick look around. Excuse me. Alright, so basically what happens is font set use. I get the font set out of the render target, and I tell it that I want to use this font ID. Does that work? Does not take two arguments. Okay. It also needs a pointer to the partition. Very fair. Very fair. So now I need a partition pointer, like so. This guy down here is also going to need a partition pointer, because right there he calls this guy. This guy here is going to need a partition pointer. As will the guy below him. This guy needs a partition. And all that is just because whenever it uses a font, it might have to load the font in. And to load the font in, it needs access to the partition so it can get some extra memory for that load. I swallowed that water improperly. So that's that's a problem. Okay. There we go. Just getting that partition everywhere it needs to go in the font rendering stuff. And damn, there is a lot of it. Almost wonder if the render target just doesn't want to have some spare memory pointer. Something to think about in the future. Might do that. I wonder if UI state has access to memory. It doesn't. But almost all UI stuff draws text. So my feeling is that I want to recant. I want to take a different approach here. I should just pass this through the render target because there's going to be a lot of people who want it, and I don't really feel like passing partitions around all day when I can just get them through there at the other end of the chain. Guaranteeably, because these guys already get targets. Like, if I had thought of this first, it would have saved me the time it took me to add and remove all these partitions, and I would have only had to do it in 2 places. I would have had to do the work I actually did. So it's like, I don't know. I guess that's what getting good is about, is just like realizing when it's worth it to use an existing abstraction to speed something up. That isn't really, because a lot of, I mean, it's totally true that an abstraction can have a cost, but there's also a lot of times when it actually doesn't. If you just take a minute to go, oh, you know what, I would have to do this much work either way, it really doesn't have that much cost. In fact, this abstraction might actually be better if you think about what it also forces through the hardware. Like, if you think about your move in terms of what it's going to do on the hardware, in this case, I'm thinking of the fact that I would have to copy this partition pointer tons and tons of times through the stack to get it where it's going, or I put it in a struct once and it's there later when I need it. Like, it's obviously the right thing to do, and it's just like the abstract solution. So Okay. Now the only problem remaining is that this guy here needs a partition. Which is fine. But the next question becomes, how do I make sure he has enough memory? Where does his partition come from? Would it maybe be better to get a pointer to a base partition so that I can... Yes. Yes, that's what I want. Yep. Okay, and now I just need to make sure to set the render target's partition pointer in here. Alright, so right here we can do target partition equals partition. And I want to do that in app step as well. Namely, target partition equals vars mempart. Okay, so is it working? I mean, I forget if I have it in the state where that means it's working. Now it says +4. Yeah. Let me drop this down to 1. Yeah, it's definitely working. Alright, I'm curious to see what happens when there's too many fonts on screen. Alright, there we go. That's cool. Null pointer. Okay, so first of all, this bug is unrelated. This just has to do with the fact that I'm slow. Yeah, that doesn't work. So that really needs to be the views font set at 1544. Alright, so that just means... Oh, there it goes. Well, you saw that it had one font and it kept the most recently, like the one that it rendered last, it kept in, which is kind of cool. It does mean it was wasting a lot of time swapping different things in all the time. What I'd probably want to do is have at the beginning of a frame, I say like frame begin, and then it counts how many frames get used or how many fonts get used. And if it gets to the point where the fonts are too many fonts are used, it just says I'm not loading any more of this frame because I've already swapped in the first n fonts that you've used. And if I keep going, then every time we do this, I'm gonna swap in all this crap and change stuff. So to save unnecessary swapping, and we'll have that measure in place, but hopefully it doesn't happen anyway, right? Because hopefully I make sure that right now I have a thing where you can see multiple fonts on the screen under certain circumstances, but if I think like if I just make sure that there's enough space there, shouldn't really ever lead to things where you can't see stuff. But why am I getting a 0 here? Thought I fixed all of these. Am I still screwed up? Color view, font set. Should be non-zero. Font get max width. Uh-oh. Font get max width. Looks like that needs to take a pointer to the font set instead of to the render target if I'm going to make this work. There's a lot of things in here now that are kind of nasty because I gave them pointers to the render target when really what they needed was the font set alone, but it was like I was going too fast to overthink it at the time, and now that I see that that's how it should be, don't exactly want to fix it right away because it's not that fun. It's not the most valuable thing, but hard to say. It might be pretty valuable. Luckily that was the only place where that one was getting used, apparently. $9.25. Nice. Alright. Okay, so the font swapping is totally working, and I should be able to just scale how many font slots there are now. So let's say there are 4 font slots instead of 1. That's so cool. And each of those really is a different font. Hack, Qt model. These are both oh yeah, that's so the Liberation mono is showing up in 2 different spots, which is cool. Is that lag or a bug that I'm seeing? Because it feels a little bit slow to move that, but that could totally be about the frame update thing, but it could also be frame rate related. Let me see, I'm going to pop this on the other screen just so because I don't like having to think about it. It doesn't look like it's spiking so badly that it should be a frame rate issue. Like, I would have to see that get... it's only like 1 or 2 when I move, and it re-renders. Okay, that one was a little... that was a 12. 5, 3, 1. Yeah, so that seems like a bug on the update of... like, this one doesn't have an issue at all. Right, it's updating right away. And that's updating right away. So what we're talking about here... oh, I totally forgot about that feature. Nice. Nice. I have to get some of these bugs worked out, like the tab bug. Special characters are supposed to be red, but they're white right now for some reason. And I haven't dealt with it. But anyway. Okay. Alright, so there's not like a list of fonts here, which there's supposed to be. So that's not working. There's also a bug here where it's not sending the update message when it should for some reason. So I'm going to look at the font list issue, because that's relevant to fonts more. Oh, I wonder if it's laggy because of the thing I mentioned where it's putting in... okay, I could test that. Because one other thing I can do that would try to put fonts on the screen. Pop you open. Look at you. You're fast. You're still fast, but you're not actually putting fonts on the screen. So let's see what happens if I fix the thing where you're not putting the fonts on the screen. And the thing that really sucks is it seems like maybe I just want to... like, when that list of fonts is on screen, it has to be possible to get to all the fonts. It can't be like, oh, there's some fonts that were too many fonts and you couldn't get them all on the screen, so they're not clickable. That doesn't do you any good. So I need some kind of way of saying, like, if the font is not available, then default to available font, or last used font, or something like this, so that you at least get them in the list. Or I have to do a thing where it's like, hey, there are more fonts, and you click like show more fonts, and then it pages down, loads them in, like puts them first or something, so that they get shown instead of the ones that were shown, something like this. Not sure how I would do that. It sounds like a pain. I'd probably just say they all get rendered in the font that you currently have, actually. That seems like the best way to go. But first of all, font set count I equals 1, do font option I, font ID, font changed equals 1, very good, do font option. Let's see, I've got a font ID here, font set from you, I get my font info. That gets me a sub ID that I assume doesn't collide for some reason, but maybe it does someday. I don't think it can right now, but I should definitely smarten up about this, because it's the whole UIID situation is a little bit dumb. I want to revisit how I do UI, because I had a kind of a good idea a little while back on that, or at least an idea that seems better. Alright, so color view 914. Yeah, so that's never triggering. What about right here? Is that triggering? That's not even triggering. Okay. So do font option isn't apparently being called. So what's the deal there? Count. Font set count is 0. Oh no. Oh. Do you ever have a moment when you're programming and it just strikes you as totally crazy that what you're doing is you're wrangling with your computer using text files? You've got this whole like thing going on, and what you're really just doing is you're just putting together a text file just to get your computer to do a specific thing, and it's like you live in an illusion all the time where it's like you've got this language and you assume sort of things about it, but really it's just a text file, and you've got a program that like does the best it can to turn that text into something that'll happen on your computer, and it's kind of actually weird. Let's see. Because I just had a moment like that. Alright. You. Yeah, so that's the problem right there, is the constant swapping in is some kind of lag problem. So, which makes sense, because loading fonts is not like something you want to do every single frame. And you can see that right there, one of the fonts doesn't even get in. Let's see. Okay, so hmm. Basically, what I want to do is come up with a way to prevent the frames from, you know, having a situation where every time the function does a step, it reloads all of the functions. Because what it actually has to do there is, first it swaps one guy out from the linked list, unlinks him from his info, and then swaps him into the linked list at the beginning, opens up the TTF file, reads all the glyphs. It also has to create OpenGL textures, which I should be freeing, and I'm not. So that was good talk, everybody. Thanks for the chat. Let's fix that. Font set use yes evict LRU. Okay. Now the best thing to do will be to compile, so it'll give me the error that skips me to that struct, and then release font load. And I was just giving it the font pointer. I gotta say, control backspace for delete word is one of my favorite things. Like, that and control delete for forward. Whenever I think to use them, I feel very clever. I very much like it. What's all this? Um, bye. Whenever I find like if zeroed like sections of functions that I'm like I have no idea why these are still around, I'm always so annoyed because it means my line count has been a lie. Right, like that just there, we got it down even farther. And I know that there was a certain point where like the code just ballooned up, and I think it's because I was doing that a lot. I was like saying I'll keep this around until I'm done with something, but then I never actually cleared it, and that happened like 5 or 6 times. That I kept a few 50 to 100 lines of code, wrote a new copy of the same stuff that worked differently in some way, and then never went back to get rid of the old code, and so there's just all this dumb stuff sitting around. And that's what where that whole text file talk really really feels pretty accurate. Pretty accurately describes the feeling I get from my code these days. Draw, release, font. So the thing I'm concerned about is that right here I created a 2D texture for OpenGL, and I need to free that. I've never had to write something that released OpenGL textures before. I've never gotten to that point. I either used other people's code, or I played with OpenGL at such a small way that it never mattered. But I'm gonna need to Google this. Alright. Free OpenGL texture. Okay. Right. Font set, release, font, draw, release, font. There we go. There we go. Alright, that's actually better. So I think the problem was like some kind of nasty OpenGL texture stuff, because even now it's not fixed. Like, it's still swapping stuff in every frame, but you can't even feel it, which is awesome, but it's also stupid because I want to make sure I fix that. I don't want it loading every font every frame when there's a lot of them on the screen. Like I said up before, ideally you never have that situation anyway, but I want to safeguard in case someone like starts running 4coder on super gigantic monitors that I couldn't predict or something, or they've got like 4 windows of font lists and they're all in different locations. It's like at some point I give up. You broke it. There's blank spots. But of course, I could always just increase the size of that chunk of memory for font at that point. So that maybe the font slots needs to hang out in a part of the general allocation scheme in the future, but I don't care right now. I do not care right now because that's so easy to swap out, and I don't care about details like that. I'm trying to get this thing working properly under the constraints that I set. So let's make it so that it doesn't refloat every font every time, right? It'll do the thing where instead of taking the last n fonts and doing it, because the way it works now is it takes the last n fonts that were used, and it says every time you render a font, if it's not available, put it in, swap somebody else out, which means that you are always, like, if you have 5 total fonts in 4 slots, then that means you use the first font, it wasn't available, so you swapped it in. Then this one got swapped out because it was least recently used, so it gets swapped out. Then it gets swapped back in. Then this gets so every time you end up loading all 5 fonts every time. And so what I could do is say, hey, look, we have a max of 4. The frame began here. Here was the first thing we saw. Here was the second. Here was the third. Here was the fourth. Cut off. Anyone else who loads this frame doesn't get loaded in, right? So these guys might have to get swapped in because maybe they weren't the set that was loaded last time. So these 4 might get swapped in this time, but then it got cut off. And then the next time this exact frame gets rendered or something very similar to it, those 4 will probably still be the 4 that we like that are at the top of the list. So we won't end up loading anybody else until one of these guys changes orders with somebody below them, which will be quite rare, or stop showing up, which will also be quite rare. So I think that'll be a really good move. And then in order to have a full reload of 4 different fonts, it would literally have to be that all 4 of the fonts that got rendered, all four of the fonts that were available stopped showing up in the first 4, and 4 more things became the first 4 that rendered. That's never going to happen. So you're only going to have 1 or maybe 2 at a time ever. And that's assuming that 4 is where I put that number, and I probably put it higher than 4. Which just makes it all better. So, all of this is old and it can go away. So that'll improve the lines of code. Oh yeah. And let's see. Oh wait, I want that back. There was one thing in there I want to keep. For now, because I don't have the parallel to it. There we go. Okay. And what that does is font set add can add something to the font. It says when we add something, it gets loaded immediately if there's still room to load new stuff. Otherwise, it just doesn't load those. Then when you do a font use call, that only ever happens during the step function, not during the init. So it's right here where we can say something like panels on screen. Detect mouse hover status. So far nothing close to rendering should have happened. Actually, let's just go to render. Render. Yes. So here we are. We get to this point. Then we'll do font set begin. I might just want a more general function that's like begin render section. And that'll take the whole target pointer and and render section. That'll also take the target pointer. Okay, and then if I pop over here to rendering helper stuff, begin render section, render target, target. Very good. And render section. Okay, and then what'll happen is, for now, I want to get that font set pointer. Because right now, this is the only one that I have for the begin-end stuff, but who knows, maybe in the future I want to expand on that or something, I don't know. Okay, so say I take the font set and I guess it needs a new variable. Yep, here we are, which is like I32 used or something like this, right? Or we could even do I16 used, since that's the limit on how many fonts there are. I hope 65536 is the number of fonts that it never gets exceeded, because you know there's always, for any particular set of objects, it's either infinite or there's some number which it never exceeds, and I hope 65536 is the number that fonts never exceed. So font set used this frame. I want a more descriptive name for this peculiar variable, actually, so there it is. And then whenever we do like a draw glyph kind of thing, yeah, so it has this thing here about font set use. So that I can do in the font set stuff. Yes, okay, so I get my set and I say, okay, oh, I don't want it to just add up one each time. It's got to have an array of like which fonts have been used or something, like okay, let me think. There's a way I could do it that's really nasty, which is to say, like, okay, iterate across the most recently used, because I have the fonts in order from most to least recently used. Look at how many of them we've used this frame, iterate across them, check each of those, see if any of them are the one we've just used. It's kind of nasty. Can't do much better than that. The only thing I could do that would be better is if I had the entire font info, like every possible font slot would have to have a flag on it that gets cleared to 0 and then set to 1. Well, there's the question of how many glyphs do I render, and I put a lot of glyphs on the screen. That's a compelling argument, because that's like the number of glyphs that I render times the number of fonts that I use of iterations across the linked list. That's not a good thing. So I think I'm gonna do a parallel array within the font set. So that's a count of how many have been used this frame. I also want font flags, font used flags like so. And when I init the font, I make sure I get enough memory for those. Alright, so the question I want to answer is, what was I just thinking about before I looked at the chat? And now I remember. Font used flags, push array, partition, UB8, not UB8, B8, max. Okay, and then rendering helper, begin render, use this frame as 0, mem set the font set of font used flags to 0, and that has the size of font set max. Okay. Okay, and then whenever a font is used via the use function, what has to happen is first we say look and see if this font has already been used, so it's already used, and the answer to that is already used equals, that should be a B8, so it matches the font set font used flags font ID -1 Alright. And then if you have not already been used, then a few things happen. First of all, we say, can we use any more guys this frame? Really is the question. Used font used this frame is less than live max. Not sure I've actually stored that either, but we will soon enough. Then increase this amount, flag this over to 1, and set already used to 1, and then only do all of this if one of those two processes has ended successfully. Okay. There's some nasty stuff going on there with the linked list that I just saw, so I had to add a little reminder. Alright, so the only problem now is that LiveMax doesn't actually exist. But that's okay. LiveMax. And then I pop over here to font set, go to the init function. LiveMax equals round down LiveMax. And of course what we could do is just say, look, LiveMax has to be an I16, friends. Cannot be any bigger than that. Yes, you're right. Let's do nothing at all. That's better. Alright, so now I'm pretty sure it's not fiddling as much crap around. It's still doing a little bit of crap, because like I said, I had put in that comment to optimize, but there shouldn't be anything getting evicted right now. Right? Whereas, if I were to switch back real quick, just to confirm my theory that we used to be getting something evicting every time, because I never confirmed, and that was dumb. When we go to the use function in the font set file, let me say, what if we just did this doesn't exist, and we went back to the way things were, which was that we always did everything in there. Right? We just said, yeah, you can use this font, go for it. Look at that. It's like, no, something's messed up, Alan. What did you do? How did you do this? You didn't spell if correctly? You spelled it without the I? Alright. Okay, there's an evict. Evict, evict, evict. Evict, yep. So we're definitely getting lots of evicts. 2, 3, 4, 5. Yep, 5 evicts every frame, which implies 5 loads every frame, because you evict one thing so you can load something else in its place. So that was definitely a good call, if I may say so myself. Alright, so I feel like putting that optimization off because it's dumb and fiddly and maybe it doesn't matter at all. So that's one of those things that's not worth the time it will take. What else is going on with fonts recently? There's so much stuff. Like, fonts, such a... if I didn't have to deal with font rendering, this would be such a much easier project. Because fonts clearly have... It's become clear to me that font rendering and layout of code on the screen are the two most interesting, difficult problems for me to... Like, they actually are the things that require math and stuff. The code parsing is almost just like... I have to get this platform porting stuff done so I can just get that out of the way. But I was looking earlier today, and it says here in the STB documentation that I didn't read it very carefully the first time through. It doesn't actually say that. I had to read between the lines to discover that. But it says right here, and these are the two this is the API I'm using. It says, don't ship this, but it's fine for tools and a quick start. But that means I need to get off of this API. Maybe I read it and determined that I wouldn't be on STB for too long, but I have been on STB for a while and I really don't want to. So here's what I actually should be using. We need STB rectpack, optionally, but we really want it, which is so close. The difference between really want and need is negligible. STBTT pack begin more shippable. Well, of course that's what Sean meant. Of course the point is that this is not really the best way to use this, and that this is a better way to use it. What's going on here that makes it less shippable is that he's just literally taking glyphs and popping them down one after the next. And it only goes like it's just laying them out left to right in like no packing, so it doesn't minimize the space, and it's also like you know, it doesn't. It could be all sorts of things, but it looks to me like the difference between this and this mainly is that packing issue. Like, who knows? But the other thing that could be going on is that this is just better tested. That this is the one that's like in use in all of the serious stuff, and he threw this in at one point to sort of be an easier API to use, and he's just saying, hey, if you want even more testing behind it. It also says this is improved quality on small fonts, which was the thing that actually caught my eye. I was searching for it and I just now found it again because I knew there was something important. It says this has improved quality on fonts, so that means in some way that this is like these are actually the things that render the font, right? And so if you have a small text, which I do, right now I can show you the situation that one of my font situations is this, right? This has been true for a while too. See this? Wait, no, you can't see it because it's all messed up. Why is it messed up? There it is. So you can see Emacs on the bottom here, and if you compare just what the text looks like at normal resolution, it's just a little bit like brighter, and like this up here looks sort of faded in certain places, and it also looks blurred in places. Like there's just weird spots where like, especially like if I look at the D here and the P here, they look like up here the overlapping isn't as good looking. Like down here they've done a better job of sharpening up the character. The T here is really messed up, although to be honest the T is a little messed up down here too, but not as much. Yeah, this one is definitely sharper because there's like a little flicker of stuff there. Then of course I zoom in and you can see that this is like doing all sorts of crazy subpixel anti-aliasing work, which is like, how do you even do that with colored fonts? But Microsoft has a way. And then up here it's similar looking, but it's not really the same. Like this line of pixels here is just absent there, and that's what creates a lot of the blurred look. Now the reason it looks faded is just because of that anti-aliasing situation. Like if I had the anti-alias subpixel stuff, that would be superb, but you could at least see how I could fix a lot of this blurring, like the I dot there versus the I dot there, if I had sharper font rendering at this scale. And that's what this says it's supposed to fix. Some of that, I think, is supposed to get fixed there. So I kind of want to spend the next portion of my time looking at how these functions work. So let's take a look at each one individually. Initialize the packing context stored in the passed-in STBTT pack context. I want to know what that is. Pack context. So wait, that's actually not defined here? Is that defined in the packing header? Well, let's take a look. I don't see how it's switching strategies is the thing that's confusing me. How is it how does it determine whether or not it's got the STB rect pack available? I don't know. So I'm very interested to know how he's doing that, because it's cool. But I don't see it. So, pixels. Interesting. Okay, so it looks like SPC. That struct's not defined here. I'm really interested to know how it's possible. Is this... Ah, here it is. So it'll be right in here, I think, wherever the if is. If... Oh, it's right there. So if you don't have STB rect pack, then this code comes in, and that's where you get your STBRP context, and a node which is char x, context which is width, height, x, y, and bottom y. Okay, so it's rectangle basically, as far as I can tell from here anyway. context stbrp. Here's the array of recs and the member of recs. I want to read this algorithm because I'm curious. So I equals 0 to the number of recs. It looks at the context x plus the recs I dot width and sees that greater than the so if adding this to the current x is going to overflow the width of the context, set the context x back to 0, bump the context con y equals con y con bottom y. Wonder what that is. That must be the bottom of the current. That's like you look at a row while you're putting it in and figure out what the bottom of that row is. And so probably there's a line down here, yes. So if height, the current y position plus the height ever goes below the bottom y, you update the bottom y. Straightforward enough. And con y plus rex I dot h is greater than con height. Let's see. So, if after you have advanced, you check and see if your y is greater than the height. It seems like that would go inside this if. Because why would you, like, x, y. Okay, because this h can change each time, so it's like, look at the height of this current thing, and if we go beyond the height of what we can fit on this row, then we're done. Okay. Otherwise, rex I dot x equals so now you assign to the rect, you get from the context the width and height of the base rectangle, and you get from the rects the width and height of each rectangle, and you start with the x and y in the 0, 0 position of the context, and you're assigning the x, y to the rectangles, so they're the rectangles are kind of behaving as an in-out channel there, which makes sense. Rex I dot was packed equals 1, so that tells you which of the rectangles fit in. You might also imagine doing a thing where you say, look, continue right here, so that it's not just a matter of fit in as many as you can and then mark them all as fit in, and then as soon as one fails, you don't put anything else in, right? So you have, because this is basically just marking a 1 on everybody up until a point, but presumably you could complicate your life by speckling in things at the end that were able to fit. But anyways, then it takes the context y plus the height, right, we looked at that, and that updates the context x by the width for I less than the number of, and then it was packed to 0 on the remainder. Okay. Tharsic, the source on the right is STB true type. It is not Emacs. I have Emacs source as well. We could look at that, but there's not really much in there that I care to see. I did some digging at one point to see what they were doing to get the fonts, because I like the way their fonts are rendered, but they use the operating system, which I don't want to do. So STB TrueType is a public domain TTF font rasterizing library. It's a part of the STB family. You should just look at let's see. I've only used STB TrueType much. I did read through the CLexer one, and it looks like I might end up using RectPack. But yeah, it's got some interesting stuff in here. intended for when you just want to get some text displaying in a 3D app. This quiz doesn't use any textures, instead builds characters out of quads. Alright, so this is like super, I think that might be an extension to TrueType. No, Tharsic, I use STB TrueType for my font rasterizing right now. And what I'm doing is trying to determine if I want to upgrade to the second API option that it offers. Because I'll show you real quick in the rendering file. Yeah, so right here, I'm using it in 4coder to get a texture with the font glyphs rasterized, and I'm using Bake Font Bitmap, which is the super basic version of the API. But there's a note in here that says that you maybe don't want to ship with this API, and so now I'm looking at the nicer one. Okay. So what is what is packend doing? That's just freeing stuff. Pack begin. What do you do between a pack begin and a pack end, I wondered. Let me see if there's an example. How is there no example of using the API? That seems like a bit of an oversight, maybe? I don't... Like, that's kind of annoying. Packing context, right? And the point is, if you include the rect packing header, it automatically uses the smarter packing thing. Pack end, pack font range. Creates character bitmaps from the font indexed font found in font data. From the font indexed font found in font data. If you don't know what that is. It creates num charts in range, bitmaps for the characters with Unicode values starting at first. Alright, so you basically, in between those, you'll say like, okay, I want to pack this range, and you say which range, Unicode char in range, num chars in range, char data for range. Okay. It creates num chars in range bitmaps for characters with Unicode values starting at first PPF and increasing. Data for how to render them is stored in char data for range, and that's a packed char, not a baked char. So that's different than what I've used in the past. X0, Y0, X1, Y1, X off, Y. It's pretty similar. I could switch to it because I don't use anything but X advance. Okay. Font size is the full height of the character from ascender to descender. Sure. Yep, I have font. Font size is the full height of the character from ascender to descender as computed by scale for pixel height. To use a point size as. So I would probably have to store the full precision floating version that I compute originally. Font size, first Unicode char in range, num chars in range. Okay, so all the same parameters just packed in a struct. Pack font ranges. Creates character bitmaps from multiple ranges for characters stored in ranges. So we'll usually create a better packed bitmap than multiple calls. Alright, so instead of calling this individually, they're saying make a few structs of these types that have the parameters you would have passed to this and put them in an array, pass them all. I don't think I'll need that because I only ever use one range because this is code that I'm writing. But I don't know, some people may appreciate me supporting Unicode. I don't know why, but some people seem to be asking for it. Let's see. Pack set oversampling. Yes, this is the one I care about most. Canuckles, would you be interested in a link where you can listen to the talks again? Because most of it is audio anyway. Because I have a link to all of the talks in audio form. So this would basically be, I take my context, I set my horizontal and my vertical oversample amount. So the number of pixels required is h oversample larger. For example, 2 by 2 oversampling requires 4 by 4 the storage of 1 by 1. For best results, render oversampled textures with bilinear filtering. Look at the README and STB test oversample for information. Alright, so that sounds awesome. Let's see, Canuckles has sent me a link. How do you rewrite to go to last row of pixels and go backwards a row after drawing one? What does this say? Bytes per pixel. Okay. Draw pixel equals bitmap start. Draw pixel plus equals header height minus 1 minus I times header width times bytes per pixel. No. You probably want to look for something about stride here, would be my first guess. Multiplying by width times bits per pixel sounds right, but it could also be that there's a stride situation happening here where maybe your bytes per pixel is 3, but it has to make a 32-bit boundary for each line, and therefore, it's like, oh, if you have 3 by, say it's 50, that's 150. That's not an 8-byte. That's not a 4-byte boundary. So it'll actually go 152 for each line and have 2 padding bytes after each line. So you need to see if you have some sort of stride variable to multiply there. That would be my first guess. Other than that, header height minus I. Header height minus 1 minus I. Bytes per pixel, yes. Screen pixel plus equals 800 minus header width. So header height would be the number of pixels in the height. Minus 1 minus that. Yeah, this part looks right. I'm really... I'm really not able to give you any other tips. I mean, if it's not stride, I don't know what it would be. The height looks right. Because the first one's height minus 1. And then you're multiplying. If that's the actual stride, then you'd end up in the right spot. After each of these, you're adding bytes per pixel, so you get to the correct next byte. Draw pixel U8 scan 0, 1, 2. So that gives you 3 guys. 1, 2, 3, 0. ARGB. Yep, that makes sense. Oh, I see what you're saying. Well, I'm still warning you that if you do get like a 3-channel bitmap in there, that could go wrong, because I know that it can. But what you're talking about doing is you need to take draw pixel, hoist it out 1 level, and set it to the last line, which you're doing correctly here, assuming you have the stride correct, right? If you take all that and you put it up here, and then at the bottom, what you need to do is subtract by 1 line width, which would be whatever you're using for stride. So header width times bytes per pixel. I'm still going to say that the stride is wrong, but the other thing you could do is keep draw pixel. 'Cause I see that what you really need is another pointer here, because you're also incrementing draw pixel here. So when you're done, draw pixel it started at a spot and then it moved over. So you need another pointer that remembers where you started, right? So you have this, like a copy of draw pixel. You could call it like draw line. Put it up here. It computes exactly like this. Right here at the beginning, draw pixel equals draw line, and then at the bottom, do draw line minus equals the width of the line, right? So that way your line pointer stays here. And the other one goes do-do-do-do, back up 1, do-do-do-do, back up 1, do-do-do-do, and so on. But I'm going to insist that the stride is going to mess up at some point. Okay. So this function sets the amount of oversampling for all following calls. The default oversampling is achieved for 1, 1. Yeah. So what I learned here was that if I was using this, what I could get is I could get a bitmap that's twice as tall, and then I would use OpenGL to resample it back into the space, and that might be the trick that I need for better looking fonts. So now the decision that I have to make is whether to work on that. Well, it's fresh in my mind. I don't see why not. So Alright, so we do the char data as packed char now. That's fine. And then packed char shows up again in pack font range. Okay. Okay. So what I want to do now is start using this stuff. If stbtt pack begin spc block text width, text height, padding, stride in bytes, text width, stride in bytes, 0 padding, fine, 1, we can do 1, alloc context 0, except I can't actually have 0 there. So then the trick is I gotta deal with the fact that this is using allocators. Okay. Pack begin is gonna call stbttmalloc. So I'm assuming that I can define that to be whatever I want. And so I'll bring you up here, and instead of grabbing everything, I'll just grab text width times text height. We're gonna need part alloc function that takes in size and context. Context. Push block part size, return result. Okay, and then it's also going to want a free internal void part free int size. This is a somewhat unfortunate way to do memory. Oh well. Pointer void context, and I'll have it do nothing. Okay. Now I need to find where I'm including that, so let's see, it's probably in rendering. And if it is, that's sad. Yeah, there it is, because that means that that probably won't compile, which will be a pain, but it's okay, we'll deal with it. stbttmalloc is part alloc. stbtt free is part free. And you see why this system is unfortunate, right? It's that if I in my whole program now, I've defined STB to be a thing that links to those functions and those functions only, which means the STB code can only be used in the context where it's the partition allocator and not the general memory allocator. If I want to have STB twice, I'd probably have to throw it in a namespace. That way I can get one version with the part and one with the general allocator. But anyway, barring that little issue, ignoring that, let's see if it compiles. It shouldn't, but it does. So I was wrong. It does. It should. I was just incorrect. Now back to the STB file. Yeah, Canuckles, going back to who strides would work, assuming that the line width is exactly the stride. As long as the line width equals the stride, like the line width in bytes is equal to the stride in bytes, then you could go back twice because you've obviously gone forward once and you go back once and you go back again. I wouldn't recommend it doing that way because, again, once you do find a bitmap that has a weird stride, it's going to be weird. But so long as the bitmaps you're dealing with don't have weird stride, then you should be fine. Pack begin. Yes. Okay. Canuckles, what I'm saying is there's normally a stride variable in the header, and that doesn't always equal the width of the pixel times the width of the bitmap. You know what I mean? Like, it's possible for there to be a stride that is not the width of the pixel times the width of the bitmap. Maybe your header does have that property, but like maybe your bitmap does have the property that the width of the bitmap times the width of the byte, or the width of a pixel, is equal to the stride. That's not going to be generally correct for all bitmaps. But how did you calculate the stride is my question. You're saying you calculated the stride from what? From what details? Because from what I saw, you calculated it by the width times the width of the pixel. No, that's my point. The width of a single pixel. Let me show you a quick picture of this. So a bitmap is basically a bunch of lines like this, right? And one pixel, let's look at one pixel there, is a member of a line, right? And say that that is 3 bytes, okay? And let's say that the next pixel is 3 bytes. Let's say that the next pixel is 3 bytes. And the next one, and the next one. Okay? So that means there are 15 bytes in that line. But that doesn't mean that this line necessarily starts at byte 15. This line here could start at byte 16, right? Someone might have said, hey, I want 5 pixels per line, 3 bytes per pixel, and then I want 1 extra padding byte. That way my stride is 16. Right? So just multiplying the 5 by the 3 to get this 15 isn't necessarily your stride. The stride in the header can actually say, oh, my stride is 16 bytes per line because I have 1 padding byte. And the reason I have 1 padding byte is because I refuse to end on a number. I refuse to start a line, basically. I refuse for this line here to start on something that's not aligned to a 4 byte boundary. So this actually starts at 16, and this actually starts at 32, etc., even though each of these lines only has 15 bytes of useful information. That can totally happen. When I was messing with bitmaps, that's what took me a while to resolve, was that issue. And I can't remember how I resolved it, because maybe the header doesn't have maybe the header doesn't actually have the stride information. Maybe that was the reason it was a pain for me, but it can totally happen. It would totally suck if the header didn't have stride information. And I remember having to like reverse engineer why, because my thing was like not working for Windows. Like I would render a bitmap out. I think what happened was what I had to do reverse engineering on was the Windows like viewer. This thing here would not recognize a bitmap unless I padded it the way it wanted. So it might be that you have an unpadded bitmap, and that's fine, but there are bitmaps that are totally padded. And the way your pictures wouldn't run into that, like if it's doing 4 byte alignment, which is what mine was doing, all the bitmaps I used wanted to align those lines to 4 bytes, which isn't required of the format, but is allowed by the format. And I think Windows does it by default, and like if you don't, it won't work. But like if the width of the bitmap is a multiple of 4, or if you have a 4-channel bitmap, it won't matter. It won't have padding because that'll line up. And no, ARGB implies 32-bit. Yeah, RGB would be the format for 32-bit or for 24-bit pixels. And then if you had an odd number or a non-multiple of 4 number of those pixels, that's where you might get padding. Anyway, let's see. Got about 10 minutes left. If I can finish up this thing. Let's see. stbtt pack end SBC. And up at the top I did begin a temporary memory. Good. Okay. So now it'll just be able to allocate off of my partition allocator there. Font range. Alright, so I want to do stbtt pack font range onto the SPC. This can fail, so I want that there. Font data, file data, I assume is what you mean. Let's see, font index 0, font size, put size. Make sure to pop the mic every once in a while. First Unicode character in range. Well, down here, how did I make this work? 0 to 128 is what I was doing. And I bet it's the same formula that I want to use again. Yeah. So I'll just say 0 to 128, even though I don't actually want a lot of those. There's about 30 in there that are randomly speckled around the beginning that I don't want. Something like that. Whatever. It's what I was doing before. It should keep working, hopefully. Font range 0 to 128. And then there's the matter of the char data. And if that fails, result equals 0. Wait, what does this return? Wrap the point size in SE and pass that result as font size. To use a point size as computed by scale for mapping M to pixels, wrap the point size in STBTT point size. Really? I didn't know that. Okay. That could do some good. And do nothing. And right here I want to set that overpacking situation. STBTT pack set oversample, the oversample, not overpack. Okay. Overpack would be a much different thing that I definitely wouldn't want. And I'll set that to oversample to the current values for now and see if everything works. Pack begin. Conversion from void pointer to non-void pointer requires explicit conversion. What are you talking about? You sure? Oh, block. Gotcha. There you go. And the potentially interesting thing about this API is that I'm noticing right now is that you could use multiple different font files and like you could mix and match stuff together. And yeah, it's got a lot of interesting flexibility actually, doesn't it? Because you specify some of the parameters here, but then you can specify these in like separate chunks that lets you split up. Yeah, it's pretty interesting. Conversion from I32 to float, possible loss of data. On the set oversample? Really? Are you talking about these? Conversion from I32 to float. No, that's not it. Identifier not found. Oh, that's a separate, okay. Pack set oversample isn't found. Oversampling. Okay. And then from I32 to float. Where's that happening? Right here. Cool. Uh-oh. Bye-bye. What did I get wrong? So it is in the that situation. Data position. What? How did those get so messed up? Part alloc. The partition. That's pretty messed up. Did I fail to give it to you? Pack font range. Pack. No. It must have reused this one. Partition. Okay. It's kind of weird. Something going on in STB that I don't understand, possibly. Let's take a look. So here's my alloc context. I assume that that pointer is going to be passed to me whenever a malloc happens. Yes and yes. Okay. Okay. Third assert. Just less than max over sample. Over sample. Ooh. Shoot. I did it again. Okay, into this function. Now, notice there's no alloc context pointer here. Right? Pack font ranges. Does a little bit of math, that's fine. Okay. One range. I'm sure now it's just for range. Clear it all to 0. That's going to take a little while, so let's skip ahead. Canucles, yeah, I've noticed my posture is actually a little bit messed up the last week. I normally have, I would say, pretty fantastic posture at the computer, but I've been doing a little bit of this recently. I'm not sure why. I'm used to being like this 24/7 at my computer, but I think something's up with my neck because it's been more sore than usual. My sleeping condition somehow screwed up at one point, and now I'm not quite doing it right, but I should. You are totally correct. Huh, okay, so it did store this in there, in the context, and now it's doing another malloc. That was fine, okay. Just looking to see if there's any mallocs here. No. Okay. That's going to take a while. Skip ahead to here. This is going to take a while, so you, and then you, and then onwards. Yes, that's fine. That one's fine. Get glyph h box, make glyph bitmap subpixel. Okay, so it was in there. It did a malloc. Info user data. Where did you get this? Info user data from? Info. Your user data is a pointer to my function. So you call that, but the context, yeah, that's not really right. Something must be wrong in here. Info user data is a pointer to part alloc, which is not what it's supposed to be. You guys seeing this? Is this some kind of bug? Info. Where did info come from? It's right there. So I want to see that. Okay. So info contains... How does it already contain a pointer to that? That doesn't make much sense. What? Info it just happens to contain that because like it was on the stack before, I guess. It's kind of weird. So here it's using SPC user allocator context. I don't know. Okay, maybe right here we get a pointer. Okay, wait a minute. Back up. What just happened? Oh, okay. So we're in that other call first, and then we're in here. And what happens with info? We still have it pointing to part. How does it even point to that function? That's just random chance? Where does it get user data? Yeah, Jesse Bayer has the right idea. This desk, I have two different desks that I use. The one here and the one at my parents' house. and I really like the one at my parents' house. It's like too big for me to get it into my apartment, but I love it when I'm there because my desk is higher up by about like 2 inches, and it's much better. Okay, so this seems like an issue where info has just not been set in here, which suggests that the reason this hasn't been caught is because no one has used this with the custom allocator, maybe. I don't know. But there's certainly a bug in here. I'm almost certain of it. So, that's fun. That's cool. I didn't contribute kerning, or was it not kerning? Hinting, but I found something. So, that's kind of cool. 4. Yeah, so somewhere in here, we want something like info. Well, actually, this is the wrong spot for it. Where's that other breakpoint? Info. Yeah, this is where we still have SPC. I think this is where info user data needs to be set. Two 381. I'm still getting a function pointer there. How did that happen? Okay. User data. Definitely pointing to STBTT scale for pixel height. Alright. Big font bitmap. Okay, so that's happening in this version. So let's see, that's a bug here. This isn't the path. I'm actually going to stop using this path, but while I'm fixing bugs, so there you've got an info pointer. Vertices is not an. Okay, there you've got an info pointer. There you've got an info pointer. F is the info. Oh, geez. Okay, so 2024. Pixel height unsigned cop first. Oh. It's not even like in the function at all, which would make sense. Why would it be if you weren't using it? Callback. Okay. And then I went and changed the name of this to info. So everywhere where it says F, I have to rename it because I don't really like the fact that that's called F everywhere. Kinda silly. When it's called info everywhere else. I mean, I do that in my code all the time. You change the name you're using for something, but once you notice that it's there and you're fixing stuff, now what we need to do is bake font bitmap. User allocator context. Context for overridden stbtt malloc. Is it really? Crazy. Yes, that's a problem with my own system being janky. I think I'm going to call it here today, guys. Thanks for joining me for the stream. I'll see you all around. Bye.